Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. The digital revolution is in full swing. We see that in every facet of our lives, and both our personal lives and our professional lives. And there used to be some space in between them. I'm not sure there is anymore, but that's okay. That's sort of life here in the fast lane as we move forward. But first, just a quick word from our sponsor, BMC. Tell me, is your business operating on its fullest potential? Businesses on their A game are. BMC calls them autonomous digital enterprises. When technology and people can work together as one, business can achieve more and succeed more. Ready to get your business on its A game? Visit bmc.com/A game. So it's always fun to talk with one of our digital all-stars, Pat Fitzgerald, who is a specialist on talent and recruiting. Pat is the co-founder and managing director at CareerAv, a recruiting firm. Pat, welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be back. I really appreciate the time with you as always. I appreciate it.
No, Pat, we've known each other quite some time here. It's been fun, and you've got your own agency now, CareerAv. So you're out on the front lines working with all sorts of people, both from the corporate side who are saying, Pat, I need help with these sorts of people. And you're talking to folks out who are sort of, I guess, in this environment, sort of sifting through the opportunities and offers. So you get the front row seat of what's going on. And I think for what you wanted to talk about today, you've got some interesting perspectives on how the market dynamics right now are really changing and roiling and, upsetting some sort of standard ways of looking at stuff. So Pat, I'll turn it over to you, but I really like this dichotomy that you're going to dig into a little bit here today. This should be fun.
Thanks, Bob. Much appreciated. And to anyone that decides to listen to this, my thoughts are not to be controversial or in any way negative. It's the evolution. The topic today is the evolution of talent acquisition. And that evolution has been going on, and for any organization, it goes on decades. So this has been ongoing for many, many years. And so to get into the detail of the evolution of talent acquisition, I'd like to kind of highlight it by saying over the last several years, the big focus under the executives under HR, chief people officers, chief HR officers, has certainly evolved. And because of that evolution from, I don't know where, but to the single focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, it creates an unfortunate opportunity for the talent leadership to evolve from truly talent attraction talent to actually recruiting ops leaders. You and I both, Bob, have been blessed over the years to work for many very impressive and senior executives, work with them and work for them. I've always had a focus, and as is all the executives I've ever worked with, have always had a focus on diversity. There's always been an aspect and a value for those senior executives that I've worked with that recognized early on, well before it was as in focus as it is today, that in order to grow your business, you needed to identify the three key priorities to hiring. First one being, you got to have the person that actually can do the job. Second one, and an equal priority was, and at least all the experiences that I've worked with, was always diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everyone that I've ever worked with has always believed that diversity of experience, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of background was a huge asset to be able to continue to homogenize the growth and scale. The last one being culture, and the culture fit for those potential executives, so that they would fit into an organization immediately for both growth and scale and retention. But, and I don't mean to sound like diversity isn't a huge priority. It absolutely is, and it's always been. And we've been fortunate to work with players that have always prioritized that. But today, what's happened is under the HR leadership is the talent acquisition organizations have evolved from truly talent attraction leaders to recruiting ops players. Reporting is essential. The analogy I'd like to make is you've got a brilliant sales leader focused on customers, customer success, big deal strategy, how to develop account executives, how to attract them, compensations that are accelerators. If you take that person out and put in their sales ops person, that's the same analogy as what's happened to recruiting, to talent acquisition leadership over the last several years.
Yeah, Pat, it sounded a little bit like what you're saying here is in pursuit of a very worthy goal.
Absolutely.
Substituted process management for, functional expertise and marketplace expertise.
Yep. It's exactly right, Bob. And like the sales model, a recruiting organization is a little bit more like a sales organization than it is really a process management organization. And so the model should be a strong, inspirational talent leader that has a strong recruiting ops person that can give the data and the details that are essential for executives and the HR leadership to be able to certainly understand the success of the hiring, but also retention, scale, growth, individualized training programs. We had Pam Seplow on a couple of months ago, and Pam was that perfect synergy between talent and growth. We brought them in, we assessed them, we evaluated them, and we brought them in the right culture fit and for scale. And then Pam's team would take them to a whole new level through the internal development programs. Well, HR, again, being so singularly focused nowadays, has forgotten that. Now, my worry, Bob, is that in what appears to be certainly a weakening economy, those openings that we have, those hundreds and thousands of openings that we have, under the passive recruiting model run by a recruiting ops person versus an active recruiting model run by a talent attraction leader, we're gonna see a lot of those openings get filled by people that aren't the right culture fit.
Yeah.
And that's going to only create a greater challenge for that company where retention and frankly scale is going to be negatively impacted by that. Mark and I, my partner and I, have actually been fortunate enough to be able to consult with a couple of mid-tier companies, post-IPO companies over the last couple of years. And they've recognized even early on, and I think a lot of companies are recognizing it even more so with the economy, they recognized early on that they had a passive recruiting model, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew that that wasn't going to scale, especially because they had brought in a new leader that was demanding not only filling the jobs, but filling them with the right people, right? So we've been able to go in and consult, do a little bit of a forensic analysis of, how they got there. And we found inevitably in every one of those cases, the talent organization was led by a recruiting ops person, not by a talent attraction leader.
And somebody who says, but I filled the spots. Right. End of story. That's the goal. Pat, it's fascinating to see. And, the point you're making here about culture and the mindset of an organization, especially you talked about these, right after IPO, high growth sort of companies, they're building to scale. What is the culture that they put together for that? And today, Pat, it seems to me that as important as culture has always been in organizations, and that the leaders have to set that culture and really make sure it isn't just a poster in the lunchroom. Things are changing so quickly on the outside, right? Companies have to be able to have that internal capability to adapt to that change, embrace the change, and use it as a competitive advantage. And then I think, Pat, at the same time, if you look at it from the job seeker's point of view, there's never been a better time, right? You can sift through offers, pick this or that. So without the culture being set from the top, reinforced every way through, companies are going to have a tough time. And if folks around an organization see why are we hiring these people? They fill a spot, but they don't get the culture that we're building here. They're not playing at the level that we're aspiring to.
That's right.
That's going to cause a lot of problems for companies.
Well, we've seen it. You and I have both been at companies that haven't prioritized it or developed the right culture. And that culture is, again, always first and foremost, I've seen prioritized in diversity, because I think that was a big asset for the executives I and you have both worked for. But let me step back. You can't necessarily take the first priority of being able to do the job when you're really looking at early talent. Early talent is the future of the company.
Yeah.
It is the future of how to develop the diversity and inclusion mantra within the company. But also, what I think is lacking is that is the only priority for early talent. The first priority should be culture fit. And then the second priority of diversity and inclusion absolutely melds in perfectly. They're equal in results, but if you don't define the culture fit of the personality and the soft skills of the early talent, you're going to end up with conflicts within a year, and those conflicts are going to be devastating to the internal teams within the companies.
Yeah, and Pat, I think it's you've outlined this very powerfully, and again, the pursuit of the appropriate goals, but perhaps being done in ways that make it more difficult to get to that goal than it needs to be, right? Or we're losing sight of what is the big thing. And I just have to mention, Pat, I saw this in a Google Cloud blog post several weeks ago. They had I don't know if Google Cloud commissioned it or they just found some research that said among 500 business executives, they ranked what's your most pressing issue. They put sustainability as number one, and they had growth of the company at number 4.
That's crazy.
And I think, Pat, I called the little piece I wrote about that, I called it sustainability madness.
Yeah.
It's just not keeping our priorities straight. So I really love the way you've pointed out some of these different things here, right? It isn't a matter of not being behind, again, this very noble goal. It's like, how do you best get there and keep the company going in the direction that it needs to go, which is upward in today's economy.
And Bob, as well as I do, all of us want to create a sustainable world. We all have to do our part. We all have to be responsible for our own lives and our own actions. And that's very important to me and certainly the clients that I've worked with. But creating a situation where sustainability is the first priority and revenue and growth and shareholder, value is number 4. I'm curious how that will play out over the next, year or so with the shareholders. Again, all important, and you've said it nicely. None of these are less important than the other, but you've got to use them all together.
Yeah, and
you've got to weigh them properly to make sure that if you've got 2 candidates, and I don't mean this to sound as bad as it is, but if you've got 2 candidates and one is diversity and the other isn't, but the other has direct impact with huge success, on this line of business, experience, and the other one doesn't, then find a new role for that diversity talent, because that diversity talent's important for you, but don't throw them into the wolves and throw them into the deep end. So ultimately they fail, and then the team becomes devastated. The impact for failure at the leadership level, which we've seen, the ripple effect down below into the teams below, it is long lasting. And that's a huge dilemma.
Yeah. Well, Pat, I know you don't toss words around casually. So when you refer to that sort of mismatch and the repercussions of it as devastating, right? I mean, that can knock a company's efforts back 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? They get a reputation like, oh, they say this, but they do that, avoid them. But Pat, I think it's also telling what you've talked about before, right? That whatever a company's diversity strategy, action plan is, you've always emphasized that a big part of that has to be early in the career. Get these, fantastic young people, help them learn and figure out what it is they want to do, and then align that with what the opportunities are, rather than taking somebody, as you've described, who said really, really good at certain things, but the job is something else and the culture is going to clash there. So a multi-phased approach, but I've always loved that thing about, the diversity initiatives has to start early, right? Maybe high school, maybe college.
Right. And the leadership, the HR leadership gets the opportunity to set out quota when it comes to university and graduate and early talent hiring. to have diversity a certain percentage, and that diversity has to evolve, right? Not just ethnicity, but experience and and background. All of those are really essential to really balance off a diversity. But as you get up into the leadership roles where you're replacing an existing executive, or you're building in a management team, a middle management team that is going to scale, the background of success in that specific area, the diversity becomes an essential part of it. But it isn't the only priority. It's that background. Can they do the job? Can they scale? Do they fit the culture? And you and I have talked about this many times, Bob, but I still believe that culture is as equal or an impact on the company as diversity and everything else. And I think if you eliminate that, or don't focus in on it, or just manage to the numbers, you've lost that opportunity to really develop a high caliber, high-performing leadership team.
Yeah, Pat, it's I hope as you at Career Ave, you and Mark, as you're talking to companies, you use that analogy about if you take your head of global sales, your chief revenue officer, and say we're going to put a revenue ops person in there, people would say, well, that's crazy. And you'd say, well, that's what you're doing over here in talent recruitment. Right. Well, but that's different. Right. Revenue is important, but talent is what? Not important. So that's a wake up call there, Pat. Equating it to what happens on the revenue side, and then in some ways, I don't mean forcing them, but you are strongly encouraging people who are thinking that way to reassess what it is they're thinking about. Because if you choose to say, well, we don't have to handle talent recruitment as strategically and as critically as we handle revenue, then okay, maybe they've got some bigger questions to deal with. And in today's world, there are so many wonderful tools out there for recruiting and for HR to really be able to manage,
their results, their data. Unfortunately, what I'm hearing from most of my clients is they're not willing to spend the extra money to actually get those reports configured when they install the new system, versus actually having to create it after the fact. But again, it creates that situation where then, in order for that recruiting organization, that talent organization, to be successful, they need a recruiting ops person to help manage and build those reports. Spend the money up front, define the reports the way you really want them, and get that out of the way, just like Salesforce did for sales. Yeah. We've seen that. There are plenty of good technology companies out there that have talent recruiting tools that they have, and you can reconfigure them to define the way you want. And then you're allowed to be able to bring in a strong talent attraction leader, someone with vision, that understands the assessment tools, that understands the soft skills, that prioritizes the culture and the scalability and the evolution, and ultimately the retention, of the middle management and leaders of the company. And that company will be imminently more successful than the others.
Well, Pat, I know you've certainly touched on this in our conversation, but let's just, for a second, if we do a pretend consultation here. So I'm the CEO of a company, and I outline a plan to you that has me putting a process management person in charge of talent recruiting. And I'd say, well, Pat, we've worked hard on this. I think I got the right person. This person's really good at recruiting ops, understands the processes, is uncompromising on, sticking with the process. What do you think?
Well, and it's a natural evolution of where recruiting became part of a shared service model.
Sure.
All process, right? We've seen that. We've all seen that over the last several years. So that thinking makes sense, because that executive, that CEO, and their chief people officer are going to want reports. That's an important part, just like they want sales reports. They want reports. But what they don't recognize is that creates a very passive recruiting model. That passive recruiting model in today's world around social recruiting is posting and praying.
Doesn't sound like hope is not a strategy.
Right, exactly. And it does a couple of things. It puts a bigger burden on the hiring manager, because that process recruiter doesn't understand or isn't prioritizing their own individual abilities to assess the talent that gets submitted to the hiring manager. So in this new world, everyone that applies gets submitted to the hiring manager. And now the hiring manager's time is gobbled up with reading resumes and recognizing that, they don't have time to do sales.
Yeah.
Versus the recruiter that actually understands and is embedded in that client's management team, understands the personality of their leadership team, the scalability of the demand of this particular line of business. And it could be products, it could be engineering. It doesn't have to be sales, but the reality is embedding the recruiter in that actual line of business gives that recruiter the ability to understand the management style.
Yeah.
The demand, how fast, how slow, what, how quickly they have to hit the ground and where they need to be in a year or more. And so because of it, you really have reports. And those reports at the end of the month show that those jobs got filled, but they didn't get filled with the right people.
Pat, I have to say, I think you really nailed it a minute or two ago when you said, in certain sorts of companies, you have CEOs or the chief people officer, and what they want is reports, right? So they're sort of putting the wrong thing out in front there. No, you want fantastic people, but
right.
That's the mindset some folks have, and I think,
I just think they've bought into it, Bob. I just think that the evolution of social recruiting has had such an impact on the marketplace, and again, the fact that recruiting has moved more to a shared service model, which is really just process management and reporting. That is what I believe was the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, we've had several clients that we've actually gone in and done this consulting and evaluated their current structure and have been able to make some quick changes and longer term impact changes to be able to evolve them from passive recruiting to active recruiting. And honestly, it isn't very painful, but it's now those that we did a year ago are so well positioned in this marketplace, Bob, that they're hiring the best talent out there.
Well, I love passive recruiting to active recruiting, right? If everybody says, people are our most important asset and there's a war for talent going on, then I think active recruiting sounds a lot better than passive.
Exactly. And it's the same thing as hiring a great account executive, hiring a great talent acquisition consultant, recruiter, or whatever you want to call them, is the same importance as a great account executive, as a great product executive, as a great customer success executive, right? Those talented people have a huge impact, both culturally on the team and certainly on the growth of the company.
Well, Pat, some fascinating thoughts here on an issue that is of primary importance to every executive, every business, every sort of company everywhere. I hope people will listen hard to what you've been saying here and lean into that, Pat. And if somebody wants to find out more about you and what you do, where would they go?
So we have a website, careerav.com, careerave.com, or my email, pat@careerav.com.
Well, Patrick, that sounds great. I hope you and your family have been enjoying the summertime. There's a little bit left, and we'll all enjoy that and look forward to seeing you again in a few weeks.
Thank you, Bob. It's always good to be with you, and I really appreciate the time that you allow me. Thank you.
Not at all, Pat. Your ideas are fantastic. Thanks so much. And folks, thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Hope your summer's going great, and we will see you again soon.